Well, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has angered Russia after making several statements on the situation in eastern Ukraine. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov saying the UN chief turned out to be susceptible to pressure by the West and recently made several statements incompatible with his status and his authority under the UN Charter. Guterres has been criticizing the recognition of Donetsk and Luhansk by Russia, as well as asserting that he wouldn't consider Russian servicemen in Donbass as peacekeepers. So for more, let's go live to New York. We bring in our senior US correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. He's at the United Nations General Assembly. So, Mike, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov slamming the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres for a range of recent statements on this crisis. Tell us more.
Secretary General Guterres has been criticized in the past for not being, tough enough, not stepping up to the plate in terms of the crises that are going on around the world, not being diligent enough in trying to use the power of the UN to force a resolution. Well, this time around, he came out yesterday, coming back early from a trip overseas, and said that Russia, deeming their soldiers going in to eastern Ukraine as peacekeepers, he said is a quote-unquote perversion of the peacekeeping process, saying you go into somebody else's country without their permission, by definition, you're not a peacekeeper. Well, the Russians took offense to that, certainly saying that, Guterres has done nothing to try to implement those Minsk agreements between Ukraine and Russia in terms of how to implement a ceasefire in eastern Ukraine. They said he was basically overstepping his boundaries as the Secretary General of the UN. Here is Antonio Guterres, Secretary General, earlier today at the UN General Assembly.
The history of this conflict is complex, and at least two permanently opposing narratives. I know that their authors will never agree on what happened in the past. But in the present situation, one thing is clear. The decision of the Russian Federation to recognize the so-called independence of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions and the follow-up are violations of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine and inconsistent with the principles of the Charter of the United Nations.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres a little earlier at the UN General Assembly. Mike, stay with us. We're going to take a very short break and then we'll continue with our conversation on the latest developments out of the UN. Also, when we get back, Iran's foreign minister says talks on the nuclear deal have reached a sensitive point. Back in a bit. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. back. I'm Benita Levine. Thank you so much for staying with us. We continue with our focus out of New York. Let's go back to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. He's at the United Nations General Assembly. So over and above the comments that we just heard before the break there from Antonio Guterres, we also know the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba getting some applause when he spoke. What was his message and how did everybody there respond?
Well, everybody who has spoken so far, other than the Russian delegation, has gone to bat for Ukraine. Obviously, the foreign minister's words were heard loudest at this point. He got applause when he finished up his speech today, uttering the words, quote, "It is your ultimate duty," speaking to the General Assembly, "it is your ultimate duty to defend the Charter of the United Nations." He said no one will be able to sit out this crisis, and what is happening right now in eastern Ukraine is a concern for everyone, for all of you, addressing the General Assembly today. Russia said that even the title of the meeting today, dealing with the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, he said is a misnomer. The Russian ambassador saying it should instead be called the quote-unquote hate-filled territories, laying blame at the feet of Ukraine for not implementing previous ceasefires and threatening Russia's stability and the stability of the region with its actions. Obviously, nobody else in agreement. The country really to watch for, though, Benita, here is China. China has often gone to bat for Russia, not only in the Security Council, but at the General Assembly. But China has been big, always on territorial integrity, dealing with Hong Kong, Taiwan, issues like that. So they're stuck right now in terms of that. They swing to Russia, they're giving up their claim to territorial integrity. But if they go the other way, they're risking tensions with a major partner in Russia. Everybody right now looking to China to see if they're going to take Russia's side or if they're going to back off and maybe allow the rest of the UN to apply some diplomatic pressure to Russia here.
As you say, it will be interesting to see the position Beijing decides to take there. Thank you for that update, senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, live at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Thanks, Mike. Well, as Western